Have you ever had a dream come true and then realized what life actually looked like wasn't a dream? Maybe you dream of having your own private studio, only to realize that now half of the hours you could be spending making your art are spent on maintenance of equipment and cleaning up your studio. Maybe it's a dream of hosting classes to bring clay into the hands of more people, only to realize now you have to manage a lot more customer service issues than you ever thought. And that wasn't part of the dream. The difficult thing with the internet, as we all know, is we are only getting bits and pieces of real everyday life. And from the outside looking in, things can look really glamorous. Being a self-employed artist, being in total control of my entire schedule, not having to answer to anyone else, having all day long to make, now that is the dream. But what about the reality of that dream? Now, I know you've heard me whine and complain about healthcare on just about every single one of our episodes over the past couple of years, so maybe shining a real world light on what it's like to be a self-employed artist will come as no surprise. But Becca Otis's story still has some twists and turns that might just help you think through your own dreams. That's right, my friends. We are blending podcasts here this week. Becca, from the one and only Wheeltalk Podcast with Ryan and Becca, is this week's guest here on the Maker's Playbook podcast. Two quick things before we get going. Number one, Becca and I, Rebecca, are both adults who, when you rile up on a very important subject, can get a little carried away and use a little adult language. If you're listening with little ones nearby, headphones might be the best option, especially for the latter half of this episode. Number two, this episode does not end the way you might expect it to. So be sure to listen all the way through for a surprise. Welcome to the Maker's Playbook, the podcast where we talk all about what it's really like to make a living from the things you make. I'm your host, 12-year veteran of the self-employment world, Rebecca Igas-Cara. I'm going to let you go because otherwise it's going to sound like I'm talking to myself if I go to introduce you from me.
Hello, I'm Becca Otis, and I am a potter. I'm a production potter by trade. I also run, with Ryan Durbin, me and him do a Wheeltalk Podcast, and my business, I guess my pottery on the side business right now, it's 5 Lanes Pottery, and I'm also doing consulting right now, so.
Yes, you are. Brand new. You're definitely, what? I'm not going to dive down. I was going to say, what platform did you decide to start doing? Because now I wanted to dig into all the technical, but that doesn't actually matter to people. I'm going to put the link in the show notes. They can come see your consulting and get their butts kicked in the most positive and helpful way.
Yeah, it's through pottery, and it's wheel-based consulting, or I can do verbal consulting too, but I thought it wasn't going to work at first. I was like, I don't know how it's going to work, me just watching somebody throw. And then the first time I did it, I was like, oh, this is going to be cake. I was like, I don't know. I've been potting for, I don't even know, 10 plus years, more than 10, since 2009. And I've been doing it full time as a business since 2014. So yeah. And I'm in Indianapolis. I should probably say that. Somebody yelled at me for not having Indianapolis on my Instagram page. Yeah.
Interesting.
They're like, we don't know where you are. And I'm like, I'm sorry. Are you planning on visiting me?
I was just going to say, but also it's the internet. Why does it matter where you are?
It doesn't. It really doesn't.
Yeah. I laugh when Francesco has this conversation. We have this conversation all the time because he's also a production potter. And I feel like you two could have all of the same grievances and airing of grievances conversations together.
Yeah.
But he talks about how impossible it is to teach online because you have to, it is such a tactile craft. But then I laugh because how many times every single potter says, I could just watch XYZ, whatever mentor, whoever, we can all watch, I'm going to mispronounce his Instagram terribly, Mundo Bang. Mundo? Mundo. I don't know how
Mundo
the O's
Bang,
are.
yeah.
we could all watch him throw for years and still be learning things. And so I'm like, if you can watch someone throw and learn from them, then the person who knows things can presumably watch someone throw and teach them.
Exactly. And so I don't think that I could teach somebody how to throw if they'd never thrown ever.
Sure.
You know, like a brand new potter. It'd be difficult to do it like over the interwebs, but somebody who knows what they're doing, the only struggle you have is, hey, I need you to be more aggressive. And it's, well, how aggressive? And I'm like trying to figure out, like, I don't know if you hit your child like that aggressive. I don't know. Like, you know, like, I'm just like yelling at them through the thing. I'm like, more.
As if pottery wasn't inappropriate enough. The audio track of your consulting is probably just very, very wrong out of context.
Yeah, I don't know. Can we cuss in this or are we not cussing in this?
I presume everyone listening is grown-ups, and if we go really far, then I'll just put that little explicit label on the podcast.
Okay, well, I'll try not to, but it does slip. We had somebody recently that was like, you need to say that you're like explicit, because I cussed 8 times in the first minute of our podcast.
Did they count?
I guess. I don't know. I mean, like, it should be a drinking game, clearly, but...
And now I have I guess I'm not going to throw and listen to your podcast anymore. I'm going to change the activity that comes with it.
Totally.
Well, so I want to clarify what the consulting actually means and then talk more about this career that you have, just for anybody who's confused, since we dove straight in. If I were to use different terms, I would define kind of the consulting that you're doing as basically one-on-one teaching of throwing skills to people who already have learned the basics and want to take it to the next level.
Yeah. Specifically, it's centered around more efficient movements and working on you being able to throw faster so you can make more money. That's like the whole point, you know? And we start off saying, what's your goal? And if it's not to throw faster, if it's like, I've had a few teachers, if it's to be able to teach a little bit better and to, you know, get your skills down better to teach, and how to, you know, I can go that way too, because I've taught for years. It's, you know, it's kind of like per person what they want.
But obviously with the caveat that, like, they have to be to a certain, you've got to be able to throw a cylinder.
No, you don't even have to be able to throw a cylinder. I would say you have to be able to center. I had somebody at the very beginning who was self-taught incorrectly. You know, like I did that with knitting. I was knitting the completely wrong way. And so I completely overhauled her whole system, taught her how to throw a cylinder. And by the end of it, she was freaking awesome. You know?
That's awesome. Yeah. Okay. So as long as you know how to center.
Yeah, I would say centering is the base skill that is needed the most, or at least mostly centered, you know?
Right. Yeah. Like you understand, like you can put the clay on the wheel and turn it on.
Yeah. Ideally, I want you to be able to have a piece that looks like, you know, not like my very first piece was a seashell, basically. Ideally, we have a piece that's maybe 2 inches high. You know, that's what we're looking for.
I love it. That's amazing. Well, what I think is, you know, particular to the experience that you have, that we haven't necessarily talked about that much on the podcast, maybe a little bit with Rich recently, but is that production side of things. And I think a lot of people hear production potter and are like, oh, I don't want to do that. But there are so many skills within that. Even if you want to create one-off high-end fine art gallery pieces that you're selling for $10,000, there are so many skills within production pottery that I think are essential to, tagline of this podcast, making a living from the things you make.
Oh, for sure. I very specifically remember a video when I was like, I'm not self-taught, but I am self-taught, if that makes any sense. My professor in college could only teach me so much. And then after that, I took classes from Larry Bruning in Washington State. And that only taught me so much as well. And so, you know, YouTube was a huge teaching thing for me. It wasn't necessarily the throwing, but it was like the, you know, loading kilns and all the thing. And Simon Leach was huge in that for me. And I specifically remember him having a video saying, like, if you want to be able to make a living off of your pieces, you need to be able to throw a piece in a minute to 2 minutes. Like, you're not going to be able to make a living that's sustainable if you can't do that. And that, for some reason, just stuck with me. And I've always had that engineering side to me where I can throw the same thing all day, every day. It does not matter to me. I don't get bored of it. Like a lot of potters are
and
like,
that's what people, when I say production pottery, I think that's what people think about. And it's like, well...
Yeah, and you don't necessarily have to do that. You can mix things up, but I definitely think that putting yourself through that at the beginning or at some point, like when I was learning how to throw at a production speed, for 1 month, all I made was cups. And then for the next month, all I made was bowls. And they were tiny because I didn't have very much money. So putting myself through that to get to that point and timing myself and watching myself, taking videos of myself, watching myself throw, timing myself. Those all made myself like be aware of all of the ways that I was moving my hands and like using the clay and how much I was using the clay. We are innately, as humans, we are visual learners. Even if you think you're like kinetic learner or whatever like that, if you watch something over and over and over again, you will learn it. You know, there's people that have watched professional basketball and at 10 years old they can shoot a hoop, and that's just because they've watched it so much, you know. And that's how it is with pottery. And so that's kind of been my take from the beginning. And I struggle with people that are like, I just want to do this for fun and I want to make money and I just, you know, blah blah blah. And I'm like, well, do you want to learn how to do it well? Because we'd like you to be good. You know, if you're going to represent this craft, we'd like you to be quality. And
like the fact that you just said represent, you know, it's almost like if you have an appreciation, if you love this so much, then don't you want to do it well? Don't you want?
Yeah.
We could go down a whole path.
And like me and Ryan say all the time, and I realize that I have really bad grammar. Like we say all the time, you know, it is not our place to judge if somebody has shitty pots and they make $1 billion. Like, not our place to judge. Good for you. Go team. Like, great. But having quality pots and having a quality product quickly will make you a whole lot more money. Like right now, when I was doing production, 4 hours a day, 4 days a week, 100 pots a day-ish, you know? Mm-hmm. And I made $40,000, which is not a lot of money for a lot of people. It's plenty for me. That's all I need, you know? It's planned.
Also depends on where you live. And 4 hours a day, 4 days a week, $40,000, that's 16 hours a week. Some people, there are plenty of jobs you'd be making $40,000 a year and working 40 hours a week.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And I mean, it's probably, we'll say 20 hours a week because of course you got like distractions and stuff like that.
Sure.
But yeah, I mean, that's the goal and it's worked because I've worked so hard at being fast and being good, fast and good. I've gotten to this point where even if I'm working for myself, I only have to work 4 hours a day. And that's what I want to get to. Somebody once told me, if you want to learn how to run fast, you have to practice running fast. And that's kind of what I've based my career on, I suppose.
How would you, because I can hear this question coming from people, how would you define good? Because I think it is important to be like good and fast together.
Yeah.
But how for you, and removing the conversation of what is art and all of that.
Oh, sure.
And let's just presume, because I think you and I are both focusing on like functional work.
Yeah.
You know, we're not making sculptural teapots here. We're making
bowls,
functional
plates,
dinnerware, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. How do you define good?
To me, good is, as far as the piece is concerned, good is consistent walls. Not even, I did not say even, consistent walls, a flat top most of the time, and a proportional weight to what the pot should be. So without having to trim a lot off. Like me personally as a potter, a lot of people are going to not like me for this, but I'm not a fan of even walls all the way up. I mean, if you look at a tree, it's fat on the bottom and it's skinny on the top. If you look at a butt, it's fat on the bottom and you're skinnier on the...
It depends on what your chest size is.
Yeah, depending on the cup size. But,
Pun intended.
Pun intended. Physics is all surrounded by things being a little bit heavier on the bottom and a little bit thinner on the top. And in order to make, so glass, right? Glass, I like glass better than ceramics. I actually don't love ceramics all that much, but.
Wait, is this the quote that I should this is the pull quote for the entire episode?
Oh, well, if you want a full quote, I like plastic way better than both of those. So like Tupperware is my life. Okay, so, but think of it that way, right? So a Tupperware or a glass container is always going to be thin on the top, like a wine glass, right? It's always going to be a thin lip on the top. And if I'm an even wall all the way down, I'm not going to have any support at the bottom. But if I have a little bit thickness on the bottom and then I move up to a thin rim, then I have a comfortable rim, I have an ergonomic rim, and I also have a piece that won't fall over in grass. Or if it gets bumped, it probably won't tip over, you know? It needs to have a little bit of oomph at the bottom in order for the top to be nice and delicate. I like delicate pots, but yeah, that's what I would consider good.
Before every potter who just started last week listens to this and says, I don't have to change the way I'm pulling up now, even though my teacher at the community studio is telling me. What we're talking about also is a relatively small difference, I assume. From rim.
Very relatively small difference. Extremely.
We're not saying you can still have those nice sharp rimmed edged bowls that have an inch of clay on the bottom.
No. We're talking about a 1/4 inch on the bottom and in my math.
A quarter inch plus a few centimeters.
Yeah. Yeah. Like just maybe a tiny touch smaller at the top. But a proportional piece too, you know. If I'm going to throw a 16-ounce mug, I'm going to use 16 ounces of clay. So that's gonna be what I base that on, you know? And if I'm throwing it fast, if I'm gonna be throwing it production fast and I'm gonna be throwing a ton of them for, let's say, a restaurant or something, I might up that to maybe 1.25 pounds just to get those pieces to be a little bit oompier and a little bit more durable. And that way I can throw them faster. Because I'm working with soft clay too.
Well, so this is the interesting thing for me to think about. And I want to talk about how you make all this work pragmatically as a business, as a self-employed person, and not get too into the weeds on the technique, because hand builders are going to be like, thanks, Rebecca, this was useless.
Yeah, we can have a part 2.
So with the speed of production, a lot of people, I notice when it's teams, pieces are thrown a lot heavier because then somebody else is trimming. But when you're throwing for yourself with production and you are also the person who has to manage the time of the trimming, then I start to wonder where that, I am assuming you have to find a happy balance to where you're not trimming a bunch of stuff, because then it's kind of a waste of time. You're wasting your time. You might as well spend more time throwing.
Right. My whole goal in life is not to trim. So I don't unless it's a bowl potentially, but I just did a whole set of pasta bowls and none of them are trimmed. They were all flat bottomed and I could give 2 Fs, but yeah. So like I said, so if I'm throwing, okay, let's take a 16-ounce cup, like a mug, right? If I'm throwing a 16-ounce mug for a production like Graves Co. Pottery, who I work for, that cup is going to be 1.25 pounds. So, and it's got a thin lip and it's getting trimmed. Right? Not a lot. It's not getting trimmed a lot, but it is getting trimmed. Okay. Now, if I throw a 16-ounce cup for myself, I'm throwing it in 16 ounces and I'm cutting it down so far at the bottom that I literally don't have to trim it. I cut it off, roll the bottom, punch in the bottom with a bisque ball, and that's it. Or if I forget about it, it stays flat. I don't worry too much about it. But yeah, so that is kind of the differentiation of that. And it's not that I didn't start production first. I started my own stuff first, right? So it was more I have to add clay to this instead of I have to take clay away, So, because my teacher was always 16 ounces is 16 ounces. He was an old school 73-year-old potter. And he I didn't even know about silicosis when I left. So that's kind of where we're at. So yeah, so I have a lot of old school ways of doing it. And also I want to say, because you did say hand builders, you can do production hand building and it is very satisfying. And you just have to learn the techniques and the tricks to do it. So, and I do that as well.
So there's our trailer for part 2.
Yeah. There's our trailer.
Okay, so tell us however much in depth you want to go, but as far as when you got into clay, did you get into production right away? Walk us through kind of this trajectory of how you've made this all happen.
Sure. Yeah. One more sideline. If you are a hand builder, I have a free YouTube video. I did a demo at Beach Grove Clayworks. And just search 5 Lines Pottery on YouTube. It's like the only video. Anyway.
And also, if there's an entire intro episode I've never gotten to in the catalog that is the Wheeltalk podcast that you're like, actually, this is a waste of time, just send them to this episode in any of this conversation, by all means, and we'll link it up.
I don't know those. Ryan's is always the ones. This is the episode. I don't even listen to our podcast, so I'm not that person. I'm the Jar Jar Binks to his Obi-Wan Kenobi.
That's because also what cracks me up is people are like, I would start a podcast, but I hate listening to my own voice. And I'm like, you think I like it? That's not why I'm in. That's not why I did this.
Right? No. So as far as how this started was I was actually in Washington State and I started taking a few classes from a production potter. He is passed away now, but he produced mainly, and their company still does produce mainly planters. So we're talking 13, 11, 9, 6, 4-inch, and 2-inch planters. So, and they can throw those 13-inch planters in 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes, something like that. So that's who I was taking classes from. And I realized very quickly that I was like, oh, fuck, this is what I want to do. I was in school for pottery, kind of. And I was like, I don't know how to make this a job. I'm just going to get a regular job. And then when I realized that you could do production, I was like, that's it. And so I started practicing, and I put some stuff on Etsy, and it was so bad. They were so bad. It was in 2013, 2014, and I got a message from this person, and they were like, hey, we have a client that would really like to order maybe 60 pieces from you. Would you be interested? And I was like, is this a scam? Like, what? And so I was like, sure.
And all you have to do is forward us $2,000 first.
Yeah, exactly. And so it was through Etsy, and I was like, is this a scam? And it wasn't. And so I was like, sure, yeah, we can do that. And they're like, great, could you send us some of your samples? And so I sent them a few things using their glazes, by the way, Bruning Pottery's glazes, their clay, all the things. And then it turned out that it was Starbucks. So I'm like a baby potter making little tiny cups that have hardcore ridges in them. And
I know exactly which cups I now have a visual of exactly which cups these are.
Yeah. And they're like, these are perfect for French press and blah, blah, blah. And because it holds the grinds and stuff like that. And yeah. And so I was like, holy shit, Starbucks wants to sell my stuff. And it was a one-time thing for the roastery that was opening up in Seattle. Mm-hmm. At the time, I had my business listed in Seattle, which was completely not true. I was outside of Seattle. I was probably 40 minutes away in this tiny ass town. And coincidentally, the graphic designer for Starbucks was actually my boss at the time's brother. And we found out in the meeting. It was crazy. So they ended up ordering 300 pieces from me through an alternate, a middle company. And I was like, okay, I guess I'm good enough. Okay. I didn't have a website. I didn't have anything. I didn't have an Instagram for sure. I didn't have anything. So I'm struggling to get a website and stuff so that people could find me once they, and it was a big deal. And so I think that's originally what kind of started it off. And then
I would say so. I mean,
yeah. And then nothing really happened from that. And then probably a year later, I was working a job as an office manager in a painting company. I started out at Sherwin-Williams, and then I moved to one of their clients as one of their office managers. And something, happened with that job inevitably. And I went to my friend's house, and she goes, how much money do you have? And I was like, $6,000. She's like, how long can that last? I'm like, 3 months. So she's like, all right, you're starting your business right now. Let's go. And that's kind of how it happened. That's just I basically balls to the walls, 100%, and made a huge leap, went into debt real fast, and started doing outdoor shows. First outdoor show, lost all of my inventory to wind. Like my tent
I was
like
gonna
blew
say,
over.
when you say lost, what
No,
do
I
you-
mean lost. It was
Oh
a
my
Mother's
God.
Day. Yeah, it was Mother's Day. I remember that. And so like had to remake everything in a week. Like I've been through the ringer, and I had no idea what I was doing the entire time. But that's kind of like how the production started. I started working out in my basement. My teacher kicked me out because I was producing too much. So started like working out in my basement, got a tiny ass kiln, started, firing it every day, and just went 100% working probably 60 hours a week, doing stuff like that. And not even selling online. I was just selling at like local shows and stuff, or like wholesale or stuff like that.
Right. And then were you still out in Washington? I'll explain
Yeah.
the geography.
I was in Washington from 2012 until 2020. And then in 2020, I moved out to Indiana to work for Gravescoat Pottery. So what had happened was...
That was the impetus of the move. Okay, got it.
Yeah. So what had happened was in 2020, March 25th, 2020 is when COVID went crazy. At that time, I owned a studio on Main Street in my town. I did my own production, I did classes, and then I also did paint your own pottery.
Grief, girlfriend.
Oh, yeah. I was working and I was doing shows. I was working 90 hours a week. I was turning over 50 to 60 pieces, maybe 100 pieces a week, like in and out of the kiln, and doing the shows 3 days of that week in the summers. So I've worked enough in my life for 5 men.
Yep, I get it. The worst question anyone can ever ask me is when they find out that I shoot weddings. They're like, oh, so what do you do the rest of the week? And I'm like, I'm gonna cut you.
That is it. Yeah, so I was doing all of this stuff and slowly killing myself because of exhaustion. And because I was doing it by myself, I had one employee that, like one employee and all these students. And when COVID hit and like nothing, I could do nothing. I remember sitting in my friend's driveway and being like, I fucking hate my life. I hate what is happening right now. I can't even get a moment to myself. I'm working 90 hours a week. I'm making nothing, like no money. I'm making enough to, like, I was out of debt, but that's because I sold a house, and like I sold a house and I didn't buy another house. I slept in the studio, and then I slept in my friend's office across the street, like I was essentially quote unquote homeless, not really, but and I just like, I can't do this. And so I decided to sell the shop, and I texted Rebecca, and I was like, ironically, we have a lot of Rebeccas in this story. Ironically,
it's going to be a good episode. It's going to be a really good episode.
I texted Rebecca Graves Prowse, who owns Gravescoat Pottery, who's a friend. And I was like, do you need a production potter? And she was like, yeah, come on down.
Oh, so it wasn't even like a listing that you saw that...
She's a really good friend. I had been out there for a week to help her with her studio, just to throw a bunch of pots for her for a week. And came back, and then like a month later decided to go out there. And then it took me a year to sell everything off and finally leave. So I left in January of 2021.
Okay. So
right?
The Becca that I know is very recent, actually. Like everything that I was thinking about. And this is the funny thing. It just goes to show why I started this whole damn podcast in the first place. Me looking on Instagram and following you on Instagram is, gives me the perception of one version of life. And now we're having this conversation. It's like, oh shit, that was a year ago.
Yeah. I've had a very in-depth life. I'm 32 and I've been not living in the same state as my parents since college. Everything that I've done has been by myself or with the help of friends, never family. So yeah, I mean, like and my mom tells me that I am a calculated risk taker. So I say, I'm going to do something, I do it, and there it goes. And right now I'm really fortunate. I'm debt free, work very minimal hours. I have an apartment that's $1,000 a month. Like I can, afford that.
We're going to need to remove that part from this. I'm going to edit that out because otherwise everyone's moving to Indiana and your rent's going to get screwed.
No, it's already screwed. You can keep it in. It's already screwed. And I live in the higher end apartments just because I didn't know where I was going to live. But, I've done a lot with my life, and I've worked other jobs that have taught me business, but through a lot of failures, lots of failures, I've kind of like come to a point now where I'm pretty comfortable in what I'm doing and how I'm like approaching my life financially and stuff. So I feel fortunate, very fortunate that I haven't had to I wasn't able to rely on anybody else, and I'm single too. So I don't have
Yeah. Which is an important thing for people to realize. And
I don't have a family.
Like you're doing all of this without the security nets that are possible. So for, just for other storylines and all of this kind of stuff.
Yeah. But I'm also doing it without children too, a lot of people, when they say they want to start a full-time pottery business, have kids. And I'm like, are you sure? Are you positive this is what you want to do?
Well, and to your point, for the hours that you've put into it in various iterations, I hate saying love what you do, because I think to a certain extent all of that is also garbage, because everything we love is meant to become a business. It might not necessarily work.
Sure.
But that being said, to be self-employed, there has to be a certain, I think, from my personal experience, I think there has to be a certain level of passion to it, because it's a slog. I wouldn't change it for the world, but at the same time, if you didn't have a certain depth of passion for it, what the hell is going to get you through when you are working 90 hours a week? And
I would disagree. I would tend to disagree. And the reason being is because I think that it depends on your personality. I am not passionate about ceramics in any way, shape, or form. This is just my job. And I'm comfortable saying that, and I've said that for years. But
as made apparent by your love of Tupperware, clearly.
Correct. But I was raised by someone who, no matter what, provided, and my dad didn't go to college. He's an extremely intelligent human being. He started working at IBM and worked for IBM for 30 years. 30 plus, actually. So even though I don't have a passion for what I do, I have the determination and the awareness to know when not to quit and when to quit. And I think that's big. And especially when you are chasing money too. That's another thing, because you can be chasing money just to make sure you're staying alive. And that has nothing to do with passion. It has everything to do with just getting yourself to the next month, And I think that's what I was doing a lot when I was in Washington. And now that I'm actually taking a break from Gravesco right now to kind of alleviate some, it gets slower in the summer and stuff like that. And now it's just, what else am I going to do? I don't know. I have spent, and I know that you can restart, but I'm tired. And I don't know what else to do. This is just comfortable for me. Me watching somebody throw a pot for an hour, that's easy, why? And I don't hate it. I enjoy it. I enjoy it to a certain level, but what else would I do? Go deliver pizza?
I hear Amazon has great benefits according to their commercials.
Yeah. And also, I've backed myself into a corner where my ability to work so few of hours makes my life comfortable. So I'm happy where I am,
That's a really great point, because I also think everybody thinks if they do make what they love their job, my grandpa used to say, find what you love to do and you'll never work a day in your life. That old saying or whatever. My grandpa was a farmer. You can't tell me you didn't work, or you, yeah. In hindsight, I should have been so let's get real here, Gramps. What's going on? Because it is.
He just loved it because they get that secret payout that nobody knows about.
Wait, hold on. I feel like he clearly didn't know about that
What kind of farmer was he?
I grew up in small town Illinois, so we've got corn and soybeans and occasionally cattle. This is way back. I mean, when he was actively farming, he passed away a few years ago now. So I don't know, that was happening in the 60s and 70s. Maybe he wasn't. Yeah. Who knows?
My granddad was.
He spent it if he did.
Yeah, for sure, right? Yeah, my granddad was a farmer in Montana, and I'm where the hell did... my uncle and cousin farm that same farm now, and they're driving, the nicest trucks.
Always new trucks.
I'm where's that money coming from?
$50,000 truck. We're are you in debt? Are you in debt? What's going on? But to the point, though, that, it's still work. Don't get, okay, I always pause in saying this because I'm are my wedding couples listening to this podcast? I work with amazing people. I do really good work. But when I'm in the car driving down Lakeshore Drive in a black cocktail dress and a high bun on a Saturday when it's 85 degrees and sunny in the Midwest, which, as you will appreciate, is slim, few and far between, and everybody's going to the beach, it doesn't feel like a passion. It feels like work.
Right.
You know,
like when you're in your booth on a Saturday morning in a tourist town and a group of 8 guys walk past you talking about how they got freaking like drunk as crap last night, and you're like putting up your walls and you're like, this is my life. I'm 24 years old. This is my life.
So I have a question for you as someone who also had a storefront in a major city and
minor town.
Well,
20,000 people.
It's still a big commitment. It's still a big hard cost. For me, I felt like I kind of got pulled into here's the status symbols of this industry, so I'm going to go after those things because that's how I move along with the goals that I should be going after. What was the driving factor in getting that physical space and starting all of the things as opposed to just like production, sell your work online, what's so prevalent now, right? What I'm so surprised by is that's such a different path than what everybody on the planet now sees, which is home studio, shop update, rinse and repeat, Instagram.
I had a talk with one of my friends who I was pretty well connected in the business community in Washington, like at least the kitschy business community, And I had a friend that owned a shop in a tourist town. I was selling soap and other stuff. She sold my pots too, but I remember when I was telling her, I was just like, I don't know what I'm going to do next. I don't know. I'm running out of space. I was working in a 100 square foot basement. I had blocked off my front porch of my house with Visqueen and OSB. It looked like I was selling drugs. And my whole house was just filled with clay all the time. I was like, I just need to move. And in that time, I was like, what's going to be the most... Really, it was just a really dumb thing. I remember I was like in my bed and I was looking at Craigslist and there was a space on Main Street in Monroe for $1,800. And I texted him and then called my other friend, small town, remember, she knows everybody. And we went and visited it, and I called my dad and I was like, hey, can I get a $10,000 business loan? And he was like, I need a business plan, blah, blah, blah. And how about 7% interest over 5 years? And how about 5% interest over 3? That's how it went. And
really glad my parents never heard this interview before I borrowed money to start my business.
Oh, it later came out that my dad never told my mom that he was charging me interest, which was my idea, by the way. And then it was the saddest, most really like scariest thing when she looked at him over the phone and was like, what the fuck? Why are you charging our children interest? And so anyway, I got out of that loan without interest.
My accountant had the line item from when I was paying them back. My accountant had loan from Bank of Icus, which is obviously not a real bank, but yeah. It's the Bank of Icus that we referred to.
So I just basically did it all into a week. It was a decision in a week. Like I said, my mom says I'm a calculated risk taker. It was a week-long decision. We built it out in a month, and it was up for business that month, like December 1st.
Right.
It was ready for business, and then it just grew from there. It was mostly because I just ran out of space. I went from, also, I don't ever recommend this. I went from 150 maybe square feet space to 3,000 square foot space. Okay? Don't ever do that. Never. Like, when I left, the amount of clay that I threw away in the dumpster on Tuesday night every week, oh my God, I can't even tell you. There was so much stuff. Like, just building out that studio and then ending up, like, selling it all, it was just so much. I recommend maybe 1,500 square feet, 1,000, upgrading to like in increments maybe. So it wasn't really a decision based in fact or logic. Yeah. I knew that I could make the rent. There was a few things that led up to that point, but yeah, it was just, that's when I started teaching. Wow. I was terrible at teaching. So bad. I feel so bad for my first students. Thankfully, most of them were my friends. And yeah, it's just like that kind of progression. At the time, before I sold my house, I was at $40,000 in debt, built up the studio with about $10,000 I built pretty much everything from scratch. I wouldn't recommend it. That's not a path that I typically recommend, yeah.
What do you feel like are the pros and cons that people don't realize in terms of going from being 110% self-employed, and clearly, obviously, the con being the 90 hours of work a week,
Yeah.
nearly killing yourself from stress, but what I'm getting at is, I think online we see this kind of black and white option. You're either going to be self-employed and quote unquote living your dream life, or work for somebody else and that's it. But what I see you doing, particularly with the move to Graves Co., being in this new place, is kind of figuring out this hybrid of what do you actually need, not only on the surface, but also my assumption being like, having a little bit of that consistency from working with Rebecca number 3 in this conversation to who's like potentially Rebecca number 1, but you get what I say. What I'm getting at is, I think for many of us who have been doing it long enough, the kind of rose-colored glasses are off, and we're realizing that there might be a different balance between kind of the pure self-employed, like the lone self-employed potter making your stuff and selling your stuff, and like the pros and cons of that versus like the balance of working with somebody else, and that actually could benefit your life and give you more of what you want outside of
for sure. Yeah, I think that definitely, I don't know very many pros to what I was doing before. The connections, maybe, like the community was a huge pro. That really didn't have anything to do with my business per se. I mean, like my business gave me the community, but it wasn't, I wasn't selling anything for that. I would say a huge pro for working at Graves Co., and that's originally why you wanted to talk to me, was that I got a consistent paycheck. And what that has shown me is, well, it not only alleviates stress, but it allows me to budget and to plan for what I have in my life. And it allows me to be able to afford this life that is not big, by the way, but it's what I need and what I can have. So yeah, getting a consistent paycheck every week I wasn't even prepared for that, honestly. It was crazy. I went full tilt and started spending a bunch of money and all the things. I'm back now. But that was huge. I mean, obviously you have to listen to somebody else to they tell you the things, which I'm fine with. I don't like being the manager anyway. I have a manager personality, but I don't like to be the manager. But the pro also is in Graves Co.'s case, we have 7 introverts that all work together. And so it's a great work environment in the sense of we can get our stuff done, but we eat lunch together. I make them eat lunch together. And, we have this kind of family aesthetic almost, and it's not too loud. It's just very gentle and quiet. And so that community is really lovely. But yeah, mostly it's, and the mental switch was unbelievable. I was so depressed, and I still am. I'm still on medication, but the amount of stress and the amount of depression that I have is so minute compared to what I was going through. My body was aching. I already have fibromyalgia, so that was an issue, and all these things with inflammation and stuff. So that was huge. And I even feel it now, kind of stepping away from Graves Co. a little bit, that stress coming back. That's okay. How are you going to make money? What are you going to do? How are you going to pay your paycheck? How are you going to pay your bills? How are you going to pay your rent? It just keeps floating in and floating in. When I decided to kind of take a step back from Graves Co., I made a point to pay myself every Friday $800 because I wanted to, essentially it's $1,100, but that other stuff goes to taxes, which isn't a lot for a lot of people. It's a ton for some people, but $800 is what I am comfortable with. And I've stuck to that, except for last week, which was fine because I'm planning. I have an update that went on just 40 minutes ago. It started. So I'll pay myself $1,600 this week. And that has been a huge relief and a huge stress. It just took away most of the stress. Because even if I don't have that $800 for Friday, I can be okay, what do I need to do? Oh, I need it. 2 weeks ago, I did a mystery box sale for small things, and that gave me enough money to pay myself, and that was good. But I don't have to worry about at the end of the month, am I going to have enough money to pay my rent? I already know that I am, because I'm already a month ahead, mostly because I'm pretty okay with my finances. But I just wanted to make sure I kept it consistent from the amount that I was paying myself at Gravesco.
I think that we have to have an entire part two just on discussing kind of the mental stamina of the self-employed, because I think that's probably one of the biggest paradigm shifts or mental circus hula hoops, whatever metaphor you want to use, of, kind of, I went from being I did a year of full-time volunteer work straight out of college. And so you get a stipend. So like your room and board is taken care of. Your essentials are covered. You're not living the high life, but like you got groceries, you got a bed, you're good to go.
Right.
And so I went from a year of doing like deeply meaningful work helping people that were in a rough spot to trying to determine how much my time was worth and telling people what they should pay me, which was like the biggest mind fuck of all. And I can have somebody take my photography styling course and teach them how to shoot better photos of their pots in 6 weeks. I can't teach anybody in 6 weeks or 6 years in some ways how to navigate the mental weight that is becoming self-employed. Like it's just...
Oh, for sure. It's incredible. And, when I started doing this, like I said, I set very specific boundaries. And the whole boundaries is like a foreign word in self-employment. And I know because I've done a whole 10 years of that, of not having any. And now I have such set boundaries, 4 hours a day. I get paid $800 a week. I'm not overworking myself. I do not plan on being stressed about certain things. Like I had 4 pots break in shipping, which was the first time in 6 years. And I'm like, okay, cool. I'll just make 4 more. It's just clay, and I don't think that I could have had that perspective if I haven't gone through 90 hours a week, a whole storefront, people yelling at me, like all of those things, having classes, having 18 students at a time. I couldn't have that mentality had I not gone through that, and I have very specifically and actively chosen to be content and happy where I am. Not only that, but I've chosen not to grow. And I think that is something that is not heard in most of business, but I want to make $40,000 because I don't want to pay any more than that. And that is what I want to make. And I don't want to make a penny more. I don't care about making $100,000. That is not something that I want to do. And when you set an amount that you want to make, it is so much easier to hit that as opposed to when you were saying like, I just want to make as much money as possible. No, making as much money as possible means you want to work as much as possible. I want to make a certain amount of money, so I only have to work a certain amount, because guess what? My life is so much more valuable than my work.
I'm really glad I figured out how to make video reels of snippets of the podcast so people can see my reaction right now in the future if you follow us on Instagram at Maker's Playbook. But nobody, and I know this is the cliffhanger for part 2 because I don't want to use up more of your time than I promised, because nobody talks about when all you're doing is logging onto Instagram and looking at people with hundreds of thousands of followers and all this stuff. The thought process is you have to grow, you have to grow, you have to keep going.
Yeah.
And also I learned it for myself. I wasn't clear, and I'm systems oriented. I like spreadsheets. I'm good at math, which for most of our artistic colleagues makes them want to vomit with the words that I just said out loud. So like I had an accountant. Like I was on top of finances. But until 2020, I was kind of letting the business costs run my life, where it was like, I need to keep growing. I need to keep doing these things.
Right.
For the sake of growth, for the sake of whatever industry ladder to climb, without ever taking a minute to say, what life do I want? How much does that life cost? Therefore, how much do I need to make? And that's where we're at now, as I'm trying to say, okay, I'm getting a little burnout. How can I manage like being the primary earner? I can't stop weddings completely, but do I have to do 20 every year? Can we make it work with 11? Okay, this year we made it work with 11. Can I make it work with 8 next year? Like where are we at? Yeah, 100%. 100%.
I think that it's just crazy. And don't get me wrong, I could make $80,000 this year if I wanted to. I am talented and I have the people to do that.
And
I can.
you know how to turn off or on the switch, right? I feel like it's just levers that you can choose to move.
I always think to myself, I'm like, I'm going to be a freaking business owner and I'm going to be the person that's never wanted to grow an Instagram and has 400,000 people. That happened to me on TikTok. I got 200,000 followers on TikTok from just like literally nothing. And I'm like, I don't want this. I don't want this stress. This is not something I aspire to. But yeah, I think that the difference that you really have to, we've kind of talked about this on the podcast, but the difference you have to decide is this. Are you an entrepreneur or are you a solopreneur? A solopreneur works for themselves. An entrepreneur builds, creates, engineers businesses. Entrepreneurs have 6 businesses. They may work, but they're ahead of all of those businesses and people work under them. A solopreneur works for themselves. When you work for yourself, you can only grow so much. You cannot pass a certain threshold and you need to understand that. And at that threshold, you're going to have to start hiring people. And if you don't hire people, you're going to fucking work yourself to death. That is not acceptable. That's not acceptable. Everybody's, oh, I work so hard. And I'm so sorry. If somebody tells me that they work 60 hours a week right now, I'm like, are you okay? I'm so sorry. So that's kind of where I'm at. Oh, your headphones went away.
Well, I was about to say mic drop in response to Becca's statement right then, but my mic did drop off completely. Couldn't get reconnected with the tech. Obviously, eventually we did, but this idea around intentionally not growing really just seemed too good to mush into the middle of tech issues and restart the conversation. So I hope that the drama of that very abrupt ending to episode number 311 here on the Maker's Playbook podcast solidifies the idea in your brain. In today's world, with all of the internet shouting at us to grow, gain more followers, get more views, I think that we really need to pause and think critically about why we want to grow and how we're going to grow and what that growth will actually mean for our lives. Yes, we need to make a viable living. And I am here to shout from the mountaintops that we need to make a thriving living where we as self-employed people can save for retirement and go on vacation every once in a while, or give ourselves an annual raise, just like we would if we were working for someone else. But at the same time, we need to decide on our life first, and then find the appropriate business model to fit the lifestyle that we want. I say that with the utmost compassion for you, my maker friend, because I have been there. I mean, heck, I'm still there. But I'm working my way slowly towards that elusive balance that Becca is seeming to find. This type of conversation and critical thinking is precisely why I launched the community, which is our online home for makers to have meaningful conversations in a very, very noisy world. If you're looking for support, I'd love it if you checked out the community to see if it might be the right fit for you in whatever phase of life you're currently in. You can find out more by visiting makersplaybook.com/community or just by clicking the link in the show notes of this episode. We have makers in there who have been self-employed for decades. We have makers that have only just recently taken the leap. And we have plenty of side hustlers who might just decide to enjoy the comforts of their day job forever and keep pottery as a side hustle. Or they may decide to dive in and go all in. We also have makers in there who have retired from those day jobs and are taking a second act to their careers and restarting in the making passion that went by the wayside for a few years. Makers are coming from all over the world to challenge our presumptions while also encouraging each other to keep striving forward. Because, as always, Together, we've got this.